Hi, I'm Kansas Governor Sam Brownback, and this is our sesquicentennial year that's just wrapping up. Started last year and finishes up here with Kansas Day in 2012. I wanted to read to you a famous book written by a famous Kansan. This one's a Little Prairie House, written by Laura Ingalls Wilder. It's a famous book. It's about settling the prairie. I think you're going to like it. Once upon a time, a little girl named Laura traveled in a covered wagon across the giant prairie. She traveled with her pa and her ma and her big sister Mary, her little sister Carrie, and their good old bulldog Jack. They were searching for the perfect place to build themselves a little house. There's the picture. You can see them traveling across the wide open prairie. One day after the little family had been traveling across the prairie for a long time, Laura and Mary woke up earlier than the sun. They ate their breakfast of cornmeal mush and hurried to help Ma wash the dishes. Pa was loading everything into the wagon. See how they were getting their dishes washed? When the sun rose, they were driving across the prairie. There was no road to drive on, so Pet and Patty, the two gentle Mustangs, waded through the grasses. The dog is almost buried in the tall grass prairie. Later that morning, Pa said, "Whoa!" And the wagon stopped. "Here we are," Pa said. "Right here we'll build our house." Laura and Mary jumped to the ground. All around them there was nothing but prairie. Look at that wide open prairie space. Right away, Pa and Ma began to unload the wagon. They took everything out and piled it on the ground while Laura and Mary and Jack watched. Then Pa drove the wagon down into the prairie, out of sight, to get a load of logs from the creek bottom. Laura was a little frightened to be left on the prairie without the wagon. She wanted to hide in the tall grass like a little prairie chicken, but instead she helped Ma while Mary sat on the grass and minded baby Carrie. Soon Pa came back with a load of logs. For days and days, Pa kept hauling logs. He made 2 piles of them, one for the house and one for the stable. When he had enough logs, it was time to build. Pa began the house first. You can see he's bringing his logs back behind the 2 Mustangs. All by himself, Pa built the walls of the house 3 logs high, and then Ma helped him. Log by log, Pa and Ma built the walls higher and higher. Soon Laura couldn't climb over them anymore. Trying to get into the little house on the prairie. Then one day Pa was off hunting and he came home whistling merrily. "Good news!" he shouted. Pa had met a neighbor on the other side of the creek. His name was Mr. Edwards, and he was going to help Pa finish building the house. Then Pa would help Mr. Edwards build his house. That's the way that they did things on the prairie. Early the next morning, Mr. Edwards came. He was lean and tall, and he bowed to Ma politely. He told Laura he was a wild cat from Tennessee, and he could spit further than Laura had ever imagined anyone could spit. Laura tried and tried, but she could never spit so far or so well as Mr. Edwards could. There's Mr. Edwards bending down and bowing to Ma. Mr. Edwards was a fast worker. In one day, he and Pa built the walls of the little house as high as Pa wanted them. They sang while they worked, and their axes made the chips fly. They cut a tall hole for the door and square holes for the windows. Laura couldn't wait to see the inside of the house, and as soon as the tall hole was cut, she ran inside. Stripes of sunshine came through the cracks in the walls and went all across Laura's hands and arms and feet as she celebrates the walls going up on their house. At the end of the day, Mr. Edwards said he would go home, but Pa and Ma said he must stay to supper. Ma had made stewed jackrabbit and steaming hot, thick cornbread with molasses. Mr. Edwards said he surely did appreciate that supper. Then Pa took out his fiddle and began to sing. See, they're eating dinner together. Suddenly, Mr. Edwards jumped up and began to dance. He danced like a jumping jack in the moonlight. while Pa's fiddle kept on rollicking and Laura and Mary's hands were clapping together. Pa played and played and Mr. Edwards danced and danced. Looks fun, doesn't it? Finally, Mr. Edwards said he must go. Play me down the road, he said. So Pa played, and Pa and Laura and Mr. Edwards sang with all their might until Laura could not hear Mr. Edwards any more. Only the wind rustled in the prairie grasses, and the big yellow moon sailed high over the new little house on the prairie. And that's much of how this state was settled.